The cabin lights dimmed as passengers shuffled to their seats overhead. Bins slamming shut, flight attendants hurried down the aisle. But then a murmur rippled through the plane. Heads turned as two security officers appeared beside a young black woman in the middle row. She sat stiff, her hands clenched on her lap. The officer's voice was curt. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." Confused whispers broke out. A man muttered, "What did she do?" Another passenger shook his head. "Doesn't matter." She looks out of place. The woman rose, slowly, her eyes shining, not with fear, but with quiet fire. She adjusted her coat, gathered her bag, and walked the long aisle as hundreds of eyes bore into her, some with judgment, some with pity, most with silence. When she stepped off the jet bridge, the cold night air hit her face. She didn't argue, didn't shout. Instead, she pulled out her phone and made a single call. Her voice, calm, steady. "This is Captain Williams. I've just been escorted off your aircraft." Shut it down. 10 minutes later, chaos erupted across the tarmac. Radios crackled, alarms buzzed, air traffic control barked into headsets. Ground crew froze in shock as every plane preparing for takeoff was ordered to halt. The runway went dark, engines silenced. The same passengers who had watched her walk off in shame now pressed their faces to the windows, wide-eyed in disbelief. Because the black woman they thought was just another traveler was in fact the highest-ranking safety officer for the entire airport, and no plane would leave the ground without her command. The captain of the plane stormed into the terminal, his face flushed with frustration. "Why is my flight grounded?" he barked at the radio tower staff. But before anyone could respond, the black woman stepped forward, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. The captain froze mid-stride, his anger dissolving into dread. She spoke calmly, her voice steady, yet every word cut through the air like thunder. "I was humiliated in front of passengers, escorted off my own flight with no explanation, and now every plane on this runway will remain grounded until this airline answers." Why professionalism was replaced with prejudice, gasps echoed through the waiting area. Passengers who had whispered against her earlier now stared with wide eyes. Security officers shifted uneasily, realizing too late who they had manhandled. Flight attendants whispered among themselves, "She outranks all of us, doesn't she?" One nodded pale. "She oversees compliance for the entire airport." The captain's mouth opened, but no words came. Sweat rolled down his temple as he stammered, I didn't know who you were." She stepped closer, her gaze fierce. "That's exactly the problem you judged me not by my record, but by your assumption." Her words carried across the terminal, reporters already lifting cameras, staff gathering in silence. The truth spread like fire. The woman they had cast aside was the very authority who kept every soul in the air safe. The terminal was silent now, every passenger straining to hear her words. She stood tall in the middle of the chaos, no microphone, no podium, yet her presence commanded the room. She turned slowly, so her eyes met those who had judged her earlier, and her voice rang clear. "When you looked at me, you didn't see a captain, you didn't see a leader, you saw only what you wanted to believe, a black woman who didn't belong. But let me make this plain, I belong here, more than any plane on this runway, because without me, none of them move." The crowd shifted uneasily. A man who had muttered against her on the flight lowered his head. A mother, holding her child, whispered softly, "She's right." Others began to nod, one by one, murmurs of guilt turning into murmurs of respect. The captain tried to recover, stuttering, "Madam Captain, perhaps we can resolve this quietly. She fixed him with a stare so sharp he fell silent. "Resolve this quietly after I was paraded off like a criminal. No. Captain, the lesson will be loud, so no one forgets." Her words cracked through the terminal, and for the first time passengers who had stayed silent began to clap. Slowly at first, then stronger, until the sound filled the air, louder than any jet engine. The officers who had led her off shifted uncomfortably. Shame etched on their faces, she raised her hand and the applause quieted. Tonight the runway is closed, not because of weather, not because of machines, but because respect matters more than time. Tables! If you cannot honor that, then you cannot fly under my watch. The captain's face drained of color as every camera phone in the terminal pointed at him. The officers stepped back silently, already knowing their careers had ended. The billionaire. Frequent flyers who once scowled at delays now clapped the loudest, their applause echoing like thunder through the hall. She stood unshaken, her coat draped neatly over one arm, her badge glinting in the fluorescent lights. Her voice softened, but carried with even more weight than before. This airport belongs to the people, not to arrogance, not to prejudice. Tonight you all saw how quickly power falls when it stands on nothing but bias. Her words rippled through the crowd, faces once filled, with doubt now lit with admiration. Passengers who had looked away earlier now stepped forward, some with apologies, some with thanks. A little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "She's a hero, isn't she?" The mother nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, baby, she is." She turned once more toward the stunned airline staff. Her final words, "Steady. Let this be your last lesson in judgment. The next time you look at someone, remember, dignity boards every flight before you ever do." With that, she raised her hand and gave the command. "Runway clear, engines on." The ground shook as lights blazed back to life and planes roared awake. But no one in that terminal would ever forget why they had stopped. If this story moved you, share it so others. Never forget that one selfless act can rewrite a destiny in ways no one sees coming.